They say the orchard keeps its own time. It blooms, breaks, and begins again, no matter who lives or dies beneath it. My husband used to say if you stood still on a cold morning, you could hear the sap move, like the world's oldest clock. I laughed at him for that, until the morning the tractor started by itself. The air was silver with fog. I was brewing coffee in the farmhouse kitchen when the engine roared, our old Massey Ferguson, up on the hill. I grabbed the keys off the wall, warm from the kitchen heat, and that's when I knew something was wrong. Then came the scream, short, sharp, human. I ran through wet grass and saw my daughter pinned under the tractor's tire, an inch from death. The key was already in the ignition. My key was still in my hand. And when she finally spoke, her voice was shaken but certain. "Mama," she said, "it wasn't an accident." That was the morning our orchard stopped keeping quiet, and the morning I stopped too. Because sometimes, to protect what's yours, you have to pick up a gavel and make the world listen. That morning began the way too many do in late October in Eden-Morrow County, North Carolina, with a long list and a short supply of patience. The air hung damp and close, a pale metallic sun smudged at the horizon, no heat in it at all. In the overnight chill, the ground had stiffened just enough to trick a person into thinking it would stay steady underfoot. We know better here. The dirt can give out from under you just when you need it most. I was brewing coffee in the farmhouse kitchen, watching steam rise like ghosts from a pot of applesauce when I heard the engine catch. We keep the old Massey Ferguson up the hill, past the pack shed and the cold room, under the lean-to beside the busted mower and a stack of rain-blackened pallets that are older than some of my grandchildren. It's a red beast, ugly as a mule and twice as contrary, the sort of machine that coughs itself awake even when it shouldn't. I heard it grind, then rev, then lurch. It was a sound that should not have existed at that hour, not with the keys on their nail by the back door where they always hang. I snatched the keys just to be sure and found them warm from the kitchen heat. That was my first knowing. The second was the scream. It was not long, not operatic like the movies would have you believe. It was a single, tight sound ripped out of someone who didn't have time to be afraid because the thing she feared was already on her chest. I ran, coffee sloshing over my wrist, slipped once on a patch of dew-dark grass, righted myself, and then I saw the tractor nose down against the wall of the cold room. The concrete there was old, rutted, and seamed, and the bumper had cracked a hairline and bit into it. My daughter lay splayed like a rag, her right shoulder twisted wrong and her face white as new linen. The left rear tire had kissed the edge of her jacket and pinned the fabric, not her flesh, by an inch, and maybe God's hand. She was still alive. "Trina," I said, and then louder because mothers always think if we name our children, we can conjure their breath back. "Trina, baby, don't move." Her lips were blue. Apples from yesterday's haul sat in bins behind her, bright as coins, and one of them rolled free and bumped her palm. She tried to lift her head and failed. "The brake slipped," she said, or maybe it was Jaden, my son-in-law's name, or maybe I heard what I wanted to hear. The engine idled fast, a ragged rattle, the smell of diesel as sharp as vinegar. All I could think then was that I had to get the machine off her jacket without crushing her. I scrambled up the side, slid into the seat, jammed the keys that were in my fist into an ignition that already had a key in it. The second key clinked uselessly against the first, and I swore. I found the clutch, my knee popping as I mashed it, and then I prayed to every saint my grandmother ever whispered to that the gears would mind me. It jolted backward, a jump like a buck, and the tire rolled off the torn jacket. She curled a little, like a leaf curling from frost, and I dropped from the seat and hit the ground hard on both knees. I touched her cheek, then her wrist, then the tender inside of her elbow where the blood runs close to the skin. It ran. "You're with me," I told her. "You're with me, baby." "It wasn't an accident," she said then, low and flat as if reading a list. "Mama, he called me outside and then the brake. He said the brake needed a look. He said, could I turn the wheel?" Don't talk, I said, because something inside me was flinging its fists against my ribs and needed managing. Breathe. In, out. I'm calling 911. By the time the paramedics came, 2 men and a woman, our regular team from down in town, we had a coat under her head and her left hand threaded through mine. She watched me while they clipped and taped and strapped. Her eyes were glassy and furious both, and that made me more afraid than if they'd been empty. We rode in the back of the ambulance, my knees braced and my jaw set, the back doors banging where the latch never did catch right. On the highway, we passed a Whitmore Implements truck going the other way. Clean white cab, green lettering, chrome polished to a sermon. Jaden Swook's fleet moves through this country like it owns the dirt itself. I am 63 and more if we are counting the years I have survived, and I know when a thing is an accident and when it is the end of one rope and the start of another. The brake on that Massey had been recalled a year and a half back. Leon and I both got the letters. We took it to Whitmore's and got the work done. Jaden was the one who signed the service receipt and scrawled a smiley face like a child in a yearbook beside the words, "all set." He had been in our kitchen that night, eating my chicken and dumplings and winking at his wife while he told me the orchard might fetch good money if we were smart about it. He had a smile like a salesman's and teeth too white for a man who grew up on back roads. I met his daddy, Roy, before I met him. Roy Whitmore ran the dealership out on Route 89, the big lot with harvesters lined up like a string of dinosaurs and a flag so enormous it snapped the sky. Back when Leon first heard his heart ticking wrong, Roy came out with a bouquet the size of a wash tub and a box of Whitmore caps we didn't need and told us he knew how to keep a farm afloat when a man couldn't throw hay like he used to. He talked about creative options and realizing asset value, and he did it in that voice folks use when they want to sound like a friend and a banker both. He's a councilman, too, and has his hands in the prayer breakfasts and the rotary lunches and the quiet envelopes that pass under tables at the diner on Friday mornings. People call him Mr. Roy, and they let themselves say it like that because it takes some of the complicity out of their mouths. A man like that can taste weakness across a field. As the ambulance flew past the courthouse with its columns pretended up from Rome and swung toward the hospital, I looked down at my daughter's hair. She hadn't had the time to smooth it into the neat bun she likes for orchard work. It had come loose at the nape and curled there like a question mark. I have loved 3 people in my life the way you love your own breath: my husband, my daughter, and my granddaughter, Nia. You think the loving will make you kinder, but I've learned it can make you cruel when the world threatens your 3. In the emergency room, they slid Trina through double doors and asked me to wait and asked me to sign and asked me to breathe. I have been a school principal, the kind the kids love and the parents trust, which is to say I can sign and breathe at the same time and never let a tremor into my voice. My hands were steady over their clipboards. I pressed my lips together and tasted diesel and apples. While I sat on a plastic chair that chewed at my hip bones and listened to the worker at the triage desk explain her child's Halloween costume on the phone, I pulled my own phone out of my purse and scrolled to a number I had not called in 7 years. It rang twice and then once more, and then her voice came through. A smoke-cured alto with a legal edge, older than when I last heard it, and softer, too, like something chipped smooth by time. "Evelyn?" my sister said. "Do we start speaking in the daytime again, or is this a one-off emergency call?" "It's both, and I apologize for the years between. I apologize, Diane, for more than that. But right now, I need your mind like I need air." "Tell me," she said, and I told her. I kept it in the bones, the way she always told me to when I was sending a referral to her office, back when she wore suits and heels and courage like a cape. Near miss under a tractor, brake that shouldn't have slipped, keys that weren't in the ignition until I rammed them into a keyhole that already had metal in it. My daughter's voice saying a name like an indictment. My son-in-law's father and his interest in our trees, because our trees sit on a hill that has as good a view as the Lord ever carved. "Give me 24 hours, she said. "No," she said before I could push down the panic that rose at those numbers. "Give me 12. I learned how to split time the hard way." "What hospital?"
When the doctor came to find me, he used my full name in a way that made me stand up straighter and press my fist to the sides of my thighs. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "your daughter's shoulder is dislocated and her clavicle's cracked. No internal bleeding, no spinal fracture, concussion, mild. We're going to keep her overnight. She's one of the lucky ones." I wanted to tell him that luck had nothing to do with it, that something had been meant to happen here and had been interrupted by a jacket that snagged and a mother who runs faster than a 63-year-old should have to. Instead, I thanked him and asked for the forms, because paperwork is the chorus to crisis and we all know our lines by now. They put her in a room with a view of the roundabout where the volunteer firefighters park when they come to donate blood. Naya arrived, smelling like cinnamon gum and peppermint oil and campus. The sense of 19. She's a freshman at the community college and works at the orchard on weekends and whenever she can pry time out of her classes. She cried like she would die doing it, which is how a granddaughter is supposed to cry over her mother. I put one hand on the back of her neck and one on Trina's elbow and told them both to breathe. "Grandma," she said through a hiccup, "I know that look." "What look?" I asked. "The one you get when someone at school calls you ma'am to your face and something else behind your back," she said. "The one where you're polite as pie while your brain is building a guillotine." I wanted to laugh. I didn't. I told her after a while, "Go home, shower, eat, then come back. Bring me that folder from the bottom of Daddy's old desk, the one with the ribbon tied around it, the red ribbon. You'll know the one." She frowned, but she didn't press. She had learned me like her ABCs. That evening, my sister walked into the room with a paper cup of coffee and a zippered folio that had seen better days. Diane was elegant, even in flats, and a cardigan pilfered from some thrift store in D.C., where she now lived in a row house that wore its paint like a scab. She had left North Carolina the year she lost her license to practice law, and took with her her temper, her integrity, and all the parts of our family story that we didn't know how to handle without her.
She kissed Trina's forehead, then mine. She did not let her eyes linger on the medical tape or the purple blooming under the skin where bone strains had blood. "I can't fix this with emotion and a prayer," she said, "but I can fix other things." She sat, crossed one ankle over her knee, and put on the glasses that made her look like the smarter of our pair, though neither of us ever needed glasses to be that. "Start with the break recall," she said, and I did. She wrote as I talked, fast and angry and precise. Then we moved to the orchard and how Leon and I had met under those trees when I was 18 and thought I would teach for 2 years, then go up to Raleigh and wear different clothes than the county offered, and how the orchard kept me like a promise anyway. We moved to the Whitmores, to their slow, sweet talk, to last winter when Royce and Jaden to us with a folder and a seal and the sloppy, expensive aroma of cigars clinging to his coat. He brought us a gift deed that would transfer 30 acres of our 100 into a family land trust for protection, or so he said. The sort of protection that looks like a fence, but is really a cage. Leon had laughed him out of the kitchen. Jaden came back without the seal, but with a smile and a bottle of bourbon that cost more than my old Pontiac. He drank 2 fingers with my husband, called him sir, and said he understood a man's pride. They shook on nothing. And yet 3 weeks after Leon was buried, a notice arrived at the house from the Register of Deeds, the 30 acres recorded. A quitclaim deed, stamped and sealed. Leon's signature ghosted across it in a way that looked almost like his strong slant after his second heart attack tired him out. The notary stamp dated on a day he did not leave his bed. I would have gone to the courthouse that hour if grief hadn't been flooding my knees so hard I could barely stand. "Where's that deed?" Diane asked. I told her. She opened her mouth, closed it, and said, "You always did put the dangerous papers somewhere foolish." "Under the flower tin is not foolish," I said. "People don't look under flower." "I do," she said, and now she did smile. Sometimes the history of sisters lives in where you hide things. When Nia came back with the ribbon-wrapped folder, Diane spread its contents out on the little window table like a tarot spread. Leon kept everything, and by everything I mean every receipt, every note, every clipping that made him think or laugh. There were handbills from the farmer's market and articles about the apple blind in '98 and a photograph of me in a blue dress with a choke collar that had given me a rash for a week. There were also copies of the deed to the farm going back 3 owners. Chain of title matters to a man who believes in right. And a cassette tape in a plastic case with a handwritten label,
WZEK, call in 915-85. Arson.
Lord, I said. I had forgotten it. Or rather, I had packed the memory into that part of my brain where we store what we can't use without bleeding. In September of '85, the church we attended then, St. Luke AME, burned to its bones. They called it accidental, a wire smoldering in the walls until the walls sighed and fell. Someone crucified a cedar sapling on the lawn the week before the fire, and after the fire, someone scrawled, "This land isn't yours," on what was left of the signboard with a spray can the color of spite. Leon, young then, and still believing that truth could be coaxed or beaten into daylight, called the local station when they took callers to talk about the fire, and he said a name, Whittemore. Not Roy, who was a kid then coming up mean and smooth, but his father, Caleb, who ran a tow yard and a side hustle hauling away anything the county wanted gone. Leon's voice on that tape had a sound in it that I had not heard since the day he told me he wanted to plant 20 more trees, and could I see it, his hands flinging the future out like seeds. Half our lives, Diane said, looking at the tape and then at me. I could tell she was calculating statute of limitations and civil claims and the possibility of a suit that could unspool from the past like a ribbon and tie itself around a present crime. There's no such thing as too late where a pattern is concerned. There's a third thing, I said, and told her about the bouquet Roy brought when Leon was sick, the way he stood on my porch with the confidence of a man who assumes his weight makes the board solid. I told her how that day he mentioned our insurance in a way that made me count how many freezers we had and whether I'd locked the barn. Evelyn, she said, and I heard more than my name in the way she said it. You know I do, I said, and meant it suddenly and all the way down. I should have trusted you sooner. She nodded once, a tiny absolution. Then act like you do. Don't call Jaden or Roy. Don't mention the break. Don't warn. Let me have the first move. You're not my lawyer, I said, because truth deserves air if it's going to live among us. No, she said, I'm your sister. She left just after midnight to drive to the sheriff's office, not because they'll listen, but because we will later say we told them, and I want that sentence to be clear. I stayed and dozed and woke and listened to the hum of the hospital at 2 and at dawn and at the hour between when the night shift puts on their coats and the day shift wanders in with coffee that will go cold before it hits their lips. Trina slept hard, the way a body sleeps when it's been yanked from one world and forced against another. I had dreams, but they were domestic ones, a pot boiling over, a cake that won't rise. It is funny what terror the mind goes looking for when it refuses to name a larger fear.
By 7, Diane texted that the sheriff nodded like a bobblehead and wrote things down he will later claim he misplaced, and then suggested maybe my daughter had been careless. By 9, a woman from the Register of Deeds, who used to be one of my teachers when I was principal, called my cell. Evelyn, she said, her voice low and conspiratorial, I cannot talk about recorded documents off the record, so I am not talking to you now. But if I were talking to you, I might say there's a discrepancy in the notary's commission date. She hung up before I could thank her and left me staring at my phone the way a person stares at a cloud that they hope will turn into rain. Grandma, Nia said from the doorway, people are posting. Look. She held out her phone. Someone had snapped a photo of the ambulance in our gravel yard and put it on the neighborhood Facebook page that pretends not to be a gossip mill by banning the word gossip and leaving the rest. The comments were a chorus of concern and curiosity strung together with rumor. Folks learn to sing harmony in church here. They use it for other singing too. By noon, Roy had texted. He did not ask how his daughter-in-law was. He wrote, heard about a mishap up there. If you need us to come take the tractor and keep it until it's safe again, say the word. We'll get it out of your hair. I did not respond. That afternoon, Jaden called the hospital room and let the phone ring until the silence of the ringing turned into a sound that burrowed under my skin. Trina turned her face toward the window. Even with pain mashed into her features like a thumb into dough, she is beautiful, my girl. Big eyes and a mouth that curves like it was made to sing. She married young and headstrong the way I did, except the man she chose had a father who taught him to slide rather than stand, and that gets into a marriage like rot under paint. "Tomorrow," Diane said when she returned with hair that had been finger-combed into something like order and a bag of takeout dumplings I have always been weak for. "Tomorrow, we start tomorrow. Call the insurance company and put a hold on any claims. Don't file, just put them on notice. Then we go down to the deeds office in person because you and I both know people will tell the truth more honestly when their eye meets your eye and they remember your PTA brownies. We ask for the notary's commission file. We ask for the indexing. If there's a missing inbound courier number on that deed, we'll find it. In the afternoon, we go to Whittemore's and ask for the service log on that Massey. They'll tell us to get a subpoena, but that lobby has cameras and I want to be seen asking. On Friday, we request the county hearing docket. Roy's petition to rezone the ridge parcels is scheduled for 2 weeks from Tuesday. We will make that Tuesday our Bible. Between now and then, we will yank every root." I said, "You talk pretty." She said, "I talk like a woman who knows the sound of a gavel." And she looked at me like she was handing me an instrument. "You do too. You wielded one for 25 years, calling rooms full of children to order. Use it again."
In the quiet of Trina's room that night, when Nia had gone back to our house to sleep on the couch with the dog so the house would not feel alone, I sat by the window and thumbed the cassette tape in its case. I could not play it here. There was no machine. But I remembered the way Leon sounded when he called in, the way he always sounded when he stood up in front of a crowd at school board meetings and said things like, "Children do not become numbers for your convenience," and "We will not teach history without the names that built it." He had not loved a fight, not like Diane, but he had loved a thing more than fear, and that is almost the same. We went to the Register of Deeds the next morning early enough that the coffee in the break room had not yet burned. People hugged me the way we hug here, sideways, cautious at first and then fierce. The clerk behind the glass knew me by my maiden name, which told me I had taught their children and maybe their children. "I need to see the source documents on a deed recorded in March," I said. And when she started to say, "Fill out this form," Diane slid a business card under the glass. It did not make me proud the way people change their posture when they see credentials, even if the credentials are 7 years stale. It made me tired. We filled out the form. We signed. We waited while someone walked down a hall and then another hall and came back with the folder. We stood under the fluorescent lights and breathed toner. The deed was there, so was the notary stamp. The stamp carried a commission number that expired 2 weeks before the date on the deed. Either the notary stamped a deed with an expired commission, or someone affixed a stamp to a deed and slipped it through because the counter clerk was new and the person presenting the document had a last name that made people hurry. I am not a woman who cries in public. I used to keep a tin of mints in my desk from others who did. Not because I mind tears, I am in favor of them in general, but because they leave a salt that some women examine like it could tell a fortune, and I did not want them to feel ashamed in my office. I did not cry then. I touched my index finger to the stamp and left my fingerprint on a photocopy that already held more prints than a pawned pistol. At Whitmore Implements, the receptionist smiled a smile that had been practiced in the mirror. "Y'all need parts, service, or sales?" she said, as if that were the full catalog of human needs. "Service," I said. Small words are best in big rooms. Diane set the folio on the counter and asked for the service logs, dates, notes, parts replaced on the Macy brake recall. She asked for the sign-off. She asked if the mechanic that did the work was in today, and if he was off, was he on schedule tomorrow, and if not, when and when could he be subpoenaed. The receptionist's eyes flicked to the security camera over the door. "We'll need a subpoena," she said, and smiled again. "Of course," Diane said, and slid a small sheet of paper across the counter like it was a tip. It was not a tip. It was a public records request for the dealership's contract with the county for maintenance on county-owned tractors. She used their own network to fax it to the county office, and we stood there while the fax machine hiccuped inside.
I am not sure there is pure joy sweeter than the small sigh of a machine doing what a woman told it to do in a room full of men who expected her to be polite and go home.
On the way back to the hospital, we stopped at the thrift store on East Main, where church ladies keep a whole county in Sunday dresses and casserole dishes, and I bought a little wooden gavel for $1 with Madison County Spelling Bee 2003 burned onto it. I did not know then why I wanted it. I only knew the weight felt right in my hand. At the hospital, we found Trina sitting up, paler, steadier. Mia had braided her hair, and the braid lay over her shoulder like a rope to the boat that held her. "Roy called me," she said, when we had set our parcels down and Diane had pulled out her notes. "He said, they're praying for us. He said we should let the past be the past. He said, accidents happen." "Accidents do?" I said. This wasn't one. She looked at her lap, then up at me. My daughter has the gift for naming things at the precise instant when naming matters most. I was scared for a long time of being called a liar. Then I realized there are worse things to be called. Widow, for instance, or dead. I reached for her, and the movement unspooled something inside me. We sat in a silence that wasn't empty. After a time, Nia pulled a laptop from her bag like a magician finding a dove. "So," she said, adjusting her glasses on her head like a crown, "who wants a crash course in streaming?" "What?" I said, because the fork in my brain where I keep digital is still learning to bend. County hearings stream to YouTube. Nobody watches. You know how many people watch a county board talk about rezoning a ridge? 12 on a good day. But if you take that feed and restream it on a channel with a name people can remember, and you put a face in the corner that tells them what they're seeing in words that make sense, you can turn 12 into 12,000. Grandma, you know how you explain things to people, how you always do it without making them small. Let me build you a channel. Let's call it Grandma's Gavel. It's corny. It's perfect. Diane stopped taking notes. I picked up the thrift store gavel from the thrift store bag where I had tucked it and set it on the bedside table. The wood was nicked and the varnish worn off the handle where some sixth grader had gripped it too tight before spelling chrysanthemum wrong. I've held power smoother than that and more official, but I have never held anything that made me feel truer to myself. "Build it," I told Nia. "Build it tonight." She said, "I already bought the username." And for the first time since the tractor, I laughed, a short, shocked laugh that sounded like someone else's and turned out to be mine. The days ran like a creek, finding a new path after a storm. Not straight, but determined. We sent a spate of records requests and notices of preservation of evidence as if we had a squad of paralegals, instead of one former lawyer with a printer that jammed if you briefed on it wrong. We asked the dealership for their internal memos on the brake recall. We asked the county for the public hearing packet on the rezoning. We asked the hospital for photographs of Trina's bruises, as if those photographs could do the work our words never seemed to. When a deputy called to check in and mused aloud that it's hard to prove intent with machines, Diane said, "It's easier when the man who set the machine rolling texts his friend a laughing emoji 40 seconds later." And we set out to find the friend with the phone. You cannot live in a place like ours and mind your own business. I don't recommend minding your own business anyway. The forces that count on your silence will always praise you for it. Don't let praise confuse you. At night, when the house felt like a stage after the actors had gone, I organized recipe cards for casseroles I plan to make and probably never will. Lemon squash, baked ziti for 50, cornbread dressing with too much sage because my mother loved it that way. People bring food in grief. When grief stretches over months, sometimes the person grieving cooks to keep their hands busy and their mind from jumping off its rails. I line the cards up into neat little soldiers and then shuffle them again because the order comforted me until it didn't. That was the way my heart beat then. A few even measures and then a run. The afternoon before the hearing, Diane and Naya and I sat at the kitchen table with a red Sharpie and underlined what mattered. The stamp,
the service log, the text message that Naya got from a kid we will call M because he's 19 and the law ought to protect 19-year-olds who do not yet understand what they hold when they hold evidence. M worked the parts counter at Whitmore's and told Naya that Jaden brought the Massey in 2 weeks ago for a quick check and told the mechanics not to write it up, which is not how safety works. M sent a photo of the shop logbook page with the date and a scribbled initial and a note that said, check break, per J. Apparently, Jaden thought he was invincible enough to ask for Danger and arrogant enough to think Danger would remember not to bite his wife. People make their own rope, my mother used to say. All we can do is make sure the knot is visible. Okay, Mama, I thought, watch me tie. We wore church clothes to the hearing because we were not there as supplicants and we were not there as combatants. We were there as women who had practiced respect long enough to wield it like a tool. The county board sat under a portrait of a man none of us actually remember, and the county attorney cleared his throat and read the docket in a voice as monotone as rain. Roy sat a few rows back with a half smile and a deep tan and the kind of suit that looks exactly like money but feels like work to the man wearing it. Jaden sat beside him, eyes darting the way a squirrel's do on the road when it realizes it might have miscounted the cars. Their wives did not sit with them. Roy's wife never goes to these things. She has a garden the size of a baseball field, and she has always claimed she is too busy tending to it to attend to her husband, as if one is not the proper tending of the other.
The county planner read a staff report full of phrases like density compatible with adjacent use and access via Ridge Lane. I held the thrift store gavel in my purse and felt the weight of it the way a boxer keeps a hand on the rope. When the chair called for public comment, Nia capped my arm, and the camera she had set up caught my face and sent it into the little boxes of people's screens the way lightning speaks to dry fields. "My name is Evelyn Carter," I said, and the room quieted, because rooms do that sometimes when a woman with gray in her hair decides to make sound. "I taught your children to read, and I sent them into the world believing you would make sure it was worth the reading. 2 weeks ago, my daughter was nearly killed by a machine that someone wanted us to believe moved on its own. It did not. It moved because a man wanted the land she lives on, and he wanted it enough to put a machine in motion and trust gravity to do the rest. I did not look at Roy. I will not give a man who relies on attention the candy he craves. There is a deed in your files transferring 30 acres of our orchard to a trust controlled by the Whitmore family. The notary's commission on that deed expired before the stamp was used. That is one fact. The dealership that sold us the tractor signed off on a brake repair that was not performed to spec, and then made a note of a later check that was not recorded and should have been. That is another fact. In 1985, a church burned, and a man called a radio station and said a name. The county said accident back then, the way men say accident when it is convenient to minimize their own involvement. I am here to say pattern. I am here to say practice. I am here to say that when you vote to rezone the ridge, know who you are rewarding with more power over the dirt we all stand on. Roy rose then. He had to. Men like him believe they can put out a fire with a smile. "Miss Carter," he said, spreading his hands like a man about to deliver loaves and fishes, "we are so sorry for your family's trouble. We've always counted you as friends. Any discrepancy in a stamp is unfortunate and can be corrected. As for the tractor, it sounds like a tragic misunderstanding. My boy loves his wife. He wouldn't hurt her. Lord knows he dotes on her." "On paper," Diane murmured beside me, just for me, the way we used to share quips in choir and try not to giggle. "On paper, he dotes on her." Nia switched the stream to a split screen that showed Roy's face on one side and a close-up of the stamp on the other. She had overlaid a little text in the corner. Commission expired 2 weeks before date shown. People watching from their couches at home and from the cabs of trucks and from break rooms with vending machines that sell salt and sugar under different names began to comment. You can tell the timber of a county by the tone of his comments if you have the stomach to read them. The tone then was less "tell me more" and more "I knew it" and "my cousin said" and "Lord." A man in the back stood up, hat in his hands. He said, "Mr. Chair, point of order." No one had told him how to say that, but our county isn't short on people who can learn the steps if the music starts. I ain't a lawyer, but I do know what a break recall is. I worked the shop at Whitmore's. We had that Massey in for a check, and we were told not to write it up. I personally, he swallowed. His ears turned red. I personally regret not speaking sooner.
"What's your name, son?" the chair asked, peering over his reading glasses like a turtle considering a swim. "Mike," he said, looking suddenly as if he wished another name had sprung to his tongue. "Thank you, Mike," the chair said. "And that was the cleanest thing he has ever done in our county, and I will remember it on the day I vote for whoever replaces him." "It is my position," Diane said, when the chair allowed another comment and she stepped to the podium, "that you cannot, in good conscience and in keeping with your oath, vote to grant additional power to a party under credible allegation of fraud and harm. At minimum, you must table this petition until a proper investigation is completed. At maximum, you should consider referring this matter to the district attorney for review. I have delivered packets to each of you," she said, and aides began to distribute the packets she had copied until the machine spit out hot paper that made the office smell like ozone and progress. "You will find in them the stamp discrepancy, a timeline of the service record, and an affidavit from the register clerk regarding standard procedure for expired commissions. You will also find a letter placing our insurance carrier on notice of a claim to be filed. I do not make idle threats. I make records." Roy's smile had stiffened. I watched him choose between anger and charm and knew I had him when he chose charm again. It's a drug to men like that. They cannot go cold turkey. He talked about relationships and community values and misunderstandings. He talked about forgiveness like it was a tool he could wield to keep himself warm. I do not begrudge a man his forgiveness. I begrudge him thinking he can demand it. The chair cleared his throat and turned to the county attorney, who does not yet understand that he is less powerful than a woman with a folder and a thrift store gavel. "Counsel," he said, "what say you?" The attorney muttered the words that let a body of men do nothing while looking like they were doing something great. Out of an abundance of caution. In light of new information. He did the thing where men put their hands together like a steeple to lend their indecision holiness. "We can table." They tabled. They set the vote for 2 months hence to allow time for review. Roy stood quickly, as if standing could stop the ground from finding its way under his feet. He left before anyone could decide whether to stand with him or call a friend and say, "You won't believe what I just saw." As we walked into the parking lot, the air smelled like rain that might come and then might not. "He's going to try something else," Diane said. "When this works, a man like that tries force. He has already tried charm and cheat. Force comes next."
"I know," I said, and then, not because I am brave, but because I am old enough to know I need help, I said, "We'll be ready." That night, the barn door stood open half a foot when we got home, which it never does. We do not leave our mouths open like that here. Inside, a bale of hay had been kicked apart and scattered, a ridiculous vandalism that felt more intimate than a blow. Someone had tramped through my order with hands that do not live here. The freezer door stood ajar, ice trimming its edges like lace. The butcher paper around the venison had sweated. There was a small square of paper on the workbench, a torn corner from something else. "Sell now, save trouble," written in block print no adult man uses unless he is trying to look like he is not an adult man. People who threaten rarely know how to be inventive about it. I wanted very much to hit something, and the something I wanted was a face. I set the gavel on the bench. "No," I told myself aloud. "No." It is the hardest word sometimes. We called the sheriff and made a record. We called the insurance carrier and made a record. We called the dog in from under the porch and put her old bones on her bed and told her she was good. I made tea with too much lemon and 3 spoons of sugar and drank it hot enough to scald my tongue because I wanted to feel something honest. It was Nia who saved Diane that night, and me, and maybe the whole plan by extension. When the car pulled up to Diane's rental cottage on the edge of town, 2 cars, in fact, the kind of cars men drive when they want not to be known, but have never learned how anonymity works in a county with 1 stoplight,
Nia saw the headlights turn off and the men get out and move like they were not afraid of anyone seeing them. She had set a camera in the apartment across the hall 2 hours earlier. She had posted a simple TikTok that afternoon that said, "Watch with me, what men who fear sunlight do in the dark," and 100,000 people had watched back. The camera caught 4 men moving down a hall, and then 2 men smashing a door, and then a room that was bare of anything but a folding chair and a copy of the county hearing packet taped to a wall. Nia let the stream roll. Then she called the police and the press. And because we live in the age of receipts, she transferred the footage to 3 places at once. The men fled. The video did not. In the morning, the district attorney's office called Diane. "We were sent some concerning footage," the young ADA said, "the kind who went to school wanting to make a name and would now get to. We were also sent some concerning documents." She did not apologize for having not called earlier. People rarely do.
3 days later, the DA called a press conference on a set of steps I have climbed and sat on and marched past for 40 years. The county attorney stood with a face like a fist. The sheriff stood as if his uniform had suddenly found its starch. The DA spoke in that careful way they teach you in the mirror when you will be on television. "We are opening a formal investigation into alleged deed fraud and into allegations of attempted harm related to a brake recall not properly completed," she said. "We are reviewing historical allegations of arson in consultation with state and federal partners." I did not know until she said it that Diane had sent the tape of Leon's call to the FBI field office 2 towns over. That is her way. She does not trumpet an act because the act ought to trumpet itself. They arrested Jaden first because he is the sort of man who leaves a trail not because he is sloppy, but because he believes he is a god. He texted, "LOL, she'll learn not to mess with men's business," to a friend whose mother watches me read bedtime stories every Christmas at the library. And the friend's mother told me, and I told Diane, and Diane told the DA with enough precision that a judge signed a warrant, and a deputy who used to wash dishes in my home ec classroom put handcuffs on a man who had eaten my chicken and asked for seconds. Roy turned himself in the next morning, coming down the courthouse steps with his jacket off and his tie loosened, looking like a man caught in a summer shower rather than a man caught in a system he thought he owned. They called the charges fraud and conspiracy and tampering, the kinds of words that allow a county to feel civilized about the ugliness under them. They did not call it what I call it, though I suppose that is my job now: harm dressed in respectability, greed wearing Sunday clothes. I wish I could tell you that everything after that turned into a sweet, tidy line, like a row of new plantings in spring. It did not. People we love us less when we make them choose. The church divided itself like a cell. The diner served rumors along with grits. Some neighbors avoided eye contact, as if my eyes might do to them what my words did to other men. And there were mornings I woke up and did not know if I could speak without shouting. My daughter healed and then hurt and then healed again, the way a body does when someone else chose violence for it. She cried in the shower and sang while she cried, and I did the same, though my tune was mine alone. But there were also mornings when I stood under the apple trees before the sun moved and listened for the sap and heard it. I swear I did, pushing like courage. There were afternoons when Naya brought 3 high school kids with her, children I had taught in 2nd grade, and they pruned in that rhythmic way pruning teaches you, cut and step and breathe. And they asked me about trees and land and what it means that your family lived on a hill long enough for the hill to remember. There were nights when Diane and I sat on the porch and drank coffee too late and counted crickets and talked about the old hurts as if they were stories we might yet rewrite.
5 months later, we went to court in suits that did not fit as well as the ones across the aisle, but carried more honest work in their seams. The DA made the case I had been making to my ceiling at 3 in the morning. The judge listened. He was not a man I trusted because I no longer reflexively trust men who are called Your Honor, but he kept his impatience folded in his lap rather than on his face, and that felt like decency. When the jury came back, they did so with a look. If you live in a place long enough, you know verdict looks before you hear the words. They called the deed what it was. They called the break what it was. They called the arson suspect a suspect again after too many years of being called respected elder. They took the word pattern from our mouths and put it into the record where it belongs.
Roy's empire crumbled the way empires do in small places, not with a dramatic explosion, but with a slow leak of confidence. Banks like the smell of safety. When safety turns to smoke, they let go. Men who said "sir" stopped saying it. The flag on Route 89 went down for a cleaning and never went back up. Jaden wrote letters to Trina from the county lockup that quoted scripture as if God were a footnote to his suffering. She did not read them. She signed papers in a small room with a woman who kept tissues on her desk and a cactus on the windowsill, and the papers said, "No more." Naya filmed me on moving day as I carried a box down the farmhouse steps and narrated how you ought to lift with your legs, and 10,000 women replied in the comments with, "I wish my grandma lived next door." The county settled a civil suit with us for numbers that do not carry a soul, but do carry a future when you set them down in the right places. With it, we put a greenhouse up where the barn had been vandalized, a glass, bright, hot-breath place that grows seedlings and also children. After school, kids come and they learn what dirt does under a fingernail and what light does to something fragile. We line up their hands against the wall and mark height with a Sharpie. We feed them apples and peanut butter and sometimes cookies a volunteer brings in a tin her grandmother bought in 1952. We call the place the Carter Learning House, and I do not mind for once that my name is on a thing. It is not pride to put your name on a building when you are really putting your name on a promise. It is record keeping. The orchard remains ours, not in the way white paper says ours and then lets someone with money sneak a foot in the door, but in the way trees say it. I know your hands. I know your footsteps. I know the song you hum when you are angry and the curse you mutter when you are tired and the lullaby you sing when the baby will not sleep. If a person stood under the second row from the west on the morning of the first frost and listened, they would hear a woman tell a man who loved her that she did not let him down. They would hear him laugh at her for being sentimental about sap. They would hear them both remember the time they dropped a bushel basket and apples rolled like joy. They would hear the smack of a kiss, and they would hear a promise that feels to me like the only will that matters. The will beneath the orchard is not a document a courthouse can file. It is the intention that passes from hand to hand when people choose to treat a piece of earth as a member of their family rather than a piece of a portfolio. I picked up the thrift store Gavel the day the board finally, formally, officially killed the rezoning petition. The chair banged his own gavel and announced the vote, and I stood to leave and realized my hand had been on the little wooden thing in my purse the whole time. I brought it home and set it on the mantle beside a black and white photo of my grandparents at their wedding and a squeaky ceramic apple Trina made in 4th grade art class. Naya asked if I wanted to keep going with the channel.
"Keep going?" I said. "Child, we just began." And so we did. We streamed zoning meetings and school board wrangles and budget debates, and one night when the power went out and the board tried to finish business in the dark, we read the statutes live and made them turn the lights back on. We explained what consent agenda means and how to speak during public comment without getting gavelled into silence. People watched. People showed up who had never shown up. When someone on the board said a thing that sounded crooked, he did not say it twice the same way because he knew a grandmother with a dollar gavel would call it crooked in a voice that was not angry so much as unamused. "Grandma's gavel," people would say to me on the bread aisle. "I like how you say, 'let's go slow,' when you mean start telling the truth." They sent me mail with hand-drawn gavels in the corners and stories about their own orchards, literal and otherwise. They sent me copies of deeds to look at and asked me if the stamps looked right. I am not a notary. I am a woman who learned that sometimes all you have to do to keep your child safe is hold a room to its own rules. It would be neat, for the sake of narrative satisfaction, to end on a line that made it clear I learned to forgive, or that I held my anger like a coal until it cooled and then set it down.
I do not know that forgiveness is the right word here. When I think of Roy, I think not of a sin I have to absolve, but of pressure he will no longer apply to the people I love. When I think of Jaden, I think not of the husband he failed to be, but of the way my daughter's face looks now when she drinks her coffee in the morning. Her shoulders squared, her left hand curled around the mug and her right hand stretching slow and careful as it continues to heal. That is enough ending for me. Sometimes, at dusk, I walk the rows alone and say the names of the apple varieties because it feels like reading a poem. Pink Lady, Honeycrisp, Northern Spy, Arkansas Black Wine Sap, Mutsu. I say the names of the people who made this place too. Leon, my mother who taught me to can without a recipe, my father who swore there was a correct way to stack wood, my sister who knows the law like a song and has begun at last to sing it in my kitchen, my daughter who will not be made small, my granddaughter who makes cameras into companions and streams into windows. The names gather on my tongue like the sweetness of an apple that had too much sun and didn't apologize for it. One evening, I carried a ladder and a basket to the very top of the hill where the oldest tree stands, stump broad and low, a thing that knows it will not be asked to do more than it already has. I climbed 3 steps and reached into the branches and plucked an apple. It was not the prettiest. It had a bird peck and a scuff where a limb had rubbed it. I wiped it on my sleeve and bit. The juice ran hot down my chin. I stood there with apple sticky on my wrist and thanked whoever had the goodness to make such things possible. And then I did what I always do when sweetness astonishes me. I held it up to the sky like an offering, like a gavel, like a promise that whatever men come with their papers and stamps and smiles, we will be here. We will stand. We will name what they do. We will love harder than they can scheme. We will make a record.
The night Trina moved back into the farmhouse, small, flinty woman carrying a box labeled spices and another labeled history, we had dinner on the porch. Diane brought pound cake. Naya carried the good plates and didn't even complain. The dog lay at our feet and snored like a little engine that had at last decided to idle right. Across the road, a neighbor waved without pretending he did it for his health, and the sky did the thing the sky does here in late autumn when the light pours straight through a gap in the hills and turns every leaf into a thumbprint of gold. Listen, I told them, and they did, turning their heads the way people do in a church when the organist pauses between notes and something like God breezes through. The orchard clock ticked again, saps shushed, wind fussed. Right on time, a train we couldn't see sounded its horn a county away. I settled the thrift store gavel on my lap and rubbed my thumb over its nicked handle until the wood warmed under me. It is the strangest kind of freedom, this. Not the kind where you earn the right to tailgate down a highway and feel invincible. Not the kind where you gather paper in a stack and tell yourself it cannot be knocked over. This is the quiet kind. The kind that comes when you have stood up once, and then twice, and then more times than is comfortable, and found that your legs will hold. It's the kind where you know your child will not be pushed again without 1,000 eyes watching, and that some of those eyes will be your neighbors, and that they will recognize a pattern when they see one because you helped them practice. When the fall festival came around and the youth choirs sang off-key and perfect, and my greenhouse kids walked their parents through rows of lettuces and peppers they had coaxed into being with small hands and big patience, a woman from over in Millersville came up to the table where we sell cider to pay the heating bill and asked, in a voice sweet and sharp, "Are you the one with the gavel?" I told her yes. She held out a small package. This was my grandmother's. She used it when she ran meetings for the garden club back in the 60s. She would be proud you put one to better use. Inside was a gavel with a hairline crack and a shine that had not worn off even after hands older than mine had worried it through decades of deliberation about zinnias and bylaws and the proper number of sandwiches for a summer luncheon.
It turns out I collect gavels now. They sit on the mantle and in the greenhouse office and in the truck's glove compartment. And when I need to remind myself that quiet is not the same as weakness and that order without justice is a stage scene, not a life, I pick one up and let its weight say what it says. I have learned that the best sound they make is not the bang on a podium, but the sound they whisper in your palm. Steady, steady, steady. Sometimes late, when the porch has gone cool and the stars have decided to show off, I talk to Leon as if the air had a tin can telephone to wherever he is. We did it, I tell him. Not alone, never alone, but we did it. We held back a man who thought he could take because he wanted. And we did it with stamps and logs and sunlight. We did it with the girl who pushed go live at the right second, and a sister who remembered the feel of a courtroom, and a mother who could still run in the wet grass without breaking her hip. We did it with a county that, when pressed, remembered it had a spine. I like to think he hears me. I like to think he laughs at my sentiment again and then points at the trees and says, "Hear that, Evie? You hear that?" And I do. I hear the will beneath the orchard, not mine, not any man's, but the old will that says life is stubborn when it is tended. The will that says if you keep a record and love a piece of land and refuse to let the men who think power is a toy turn it into a weapon, you might just get to die in your own bed, with apple on your breath and the sound of sap in your ear. Until then, we watch. We name. We hold. That is what I came here to say in the first place, though I did not know it the morning the tractor pushed forward and the diesel bit my lungs and my daughter said what she said. I thought I was coming to tell you a story about a man and a machine and a deed with a dirty stamp. It is that, but it is also this. A note to the next mother, the next sister, the next child with the phone and a fierce mouth, that the gavel is not theirs, it is not mine. It is ours, and it is older than any of us, and it is waiting on the mantle or under the flower tin for the moment when you need to pick it up and tap, not like a judge, but like a grandmother calling her family to the table. Come, sit, speak plain, eat. And then, when the plates are cleared, go on out into the dark together, in a knot of 3 or 4 or 40, and wait for the sound of sap. When you hear it, you will know what to do.